The email arrives on a Tuesday. Subject line, exciting news plus a favor. I read it twice before I understand what I'm looking at. Nadia sold the company. Our company. The one we built out of her spare bedroom 5 years ago. The one with my name on half the paperwork and my savings account bleeding into every early payroll. She sold it for $400,000. And she didn't tell me until it closed. I'm sitting in my car in a grocery store parking lot when I read it. Engine off, groceries still in the trunk going warm. I read the email a third time. There's a paragraph near the bottom, cheerful, almost apologetic in tone, explaining that, given the structure of things, my original stake had technically lapsed 2 years ago when I stepped back to have my daughter. Technically. That word does a lot of work in that sentence. Below that paragraph is the favor. She wants me to invest in her next thing. A new venture, she calls it. Bigger, better, and she's raising from people who really understand her vision. She wants me in early. She says it like a gift. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I did. I sat with it for 4 days before I responded to anything. Here's what you need to know about Nadia and me, so this makes sense the way it made sense to me back when I trusted her, which is to say, completely. We met at 24. Both of us broke in the same apartment building. Both of us convinced we were meant for something bigger than answering phones for other people. She had the ideas. I had the discipline. That's how we described it to people at parties, like it was a compliment to both of us. She dreams, I execute. It sounded like balance. It was actually a hierarchy, and I didn't clock it for years. We started the business in her spare bedroom with $11,000 of my savings and a business plan she'd sketched on the back of a takeout menu. I quit my job first. She kept hers for another 8 months, just in case, while I answered every client email at midnight and figured out payroll software from YouTube tutorials. When it started working, she called me her partner in every interview, every panel, every LinkedIn post with a photo of the two of us. Partner. I believed the word meant what it says. Then I had my daughter. I took 4 months off. 4 months, not 4 years. I was still answering Slack messages from a hospital bed the night after my C-section because that's who I am. That's who I was trained to be inside that company. Nadia sent flowers. She also, apparently, sent an amended operating agreement to our lawyer during that same window, restructuring vesting terms to reflect current contribution levels. I never saw it. I never signed anything I remember signing. But there's a signature on a document with my name on it, dated the week I came home from the hospital, and I genuinely do not know if that's my hand or hers. I want to be fair here, because being fair to people who weren't fair to me is a habit I'm still unlearning. Maybe I missed something. Maybe there was a conversation buried under sleep deprivation and formula math that I simply don't remember. I've asked myself that question more than I've asked her anything. But here's the thing about a person's pattern. You don't see it while you're inside it. You see the pieces, the missed conversation, the technically, the flowers instead of the phone call, and each one feels small enough to let go of on its own. It's only when you line them up end to end that they stop looking like accidents. I didn't line them up yet. Not on that Tuesday in the parking lot. On that Tuesday, I was just a woman staring at a number on a screen. $400,000. Wondering how something I built with my own hands could disappear from underneath me using a word as small as technically. I typed a response 3 times, deleted it 3 times. What I finally sent her was 1 line. Let's talk before I decide anything. She responded in 4 minutes with a heart emoji and a calendar invite. 4 minutes. For a woman I hadn't heard from in real, uncomplicated warmth in over a year, she found 4 minutes fast enough when there was something she still wanted from me. That should have told me everything. It would take 2 more months and a lot more receipts before I let it. Before I tell you what happens in that meeting, I need to back up one more time, because you have to understand what our business actually meant to me, or none of what comes next will land the way it should. We called it Willow and Frame. Custom furniture restoration. High-end. The kind of clients who send you a photo of their grandmother's dining table and cry a little when you bring it back to life. I built the client pipeline from nothing. I taught myself bookkeeping at my kitchen table with a mug of cold coffee at 2 in the morning. Nadia was the face of it, the charm, the Instagram voice everyone fell in love with. And she was good at that. I want to be honest about that too. She was genuinely, effortlessly good at being loved by strangers. I was good at making sure the lights stayed on. For 4 years, that division of labor felt like a marriage that worked. I didn't need the spotlight. I told myself that so many times it became true, or at least true enough to live inside. If you've ever built something with someone you loved like family, you already know how this feels. Like your own name slowly getting smaller inside a story you helped write. I'm glad you're here for this one, by the way. Hit subscribe if you want the next chapter the second it drops, because this one only gets heavier from here. The meeting Nadia scheduled is at a coffee shop, not our old office, not anywhere that belonged to Willow and Frame. Neutral ground, she calls it, and I remember thinking, neutral for who? She arrives 12 minutes late in a blazer I don't recognize, hair different, a version of herself dressed for the buyers she's now courting, instead of the one who used to show up in sawdust-covered jeans. She hugs me like nothing happened. Warm, easy, both arms. "I've been dying to see your face," she says. "I've missed you so much." I let the hug happen because I'm still deciding, in that moment, whether I'm angry or whether I'm about to be talked out of being angry. And some old, obedient part of me thinks those might be the same choice. She orders for both of us without asking, the way she always used to, and slides into the story before I can slide into my own question. She explains the sale like it's a mutual triumph. She uses the word "we" 4 times in the first 2 minutes. We built something incredible. We should be proud. We deserve this exit. I ask her, plainly, why I found out from a closed deal instead of an open conversation. And here's where I watch something happen that I will replay for months afterward. Her face doesn't fall. It doesn't even flicker. She reaches for my hand across the table and she says, "Honestly, I didn't want to stress you out while you were focused on your daughter. I was protecting you." Protecting me. From $400,000 that had my name inked into the founding documents. I want you to notice that line because it will come back. Not because it's clever. It isn't, not really. But because it's the exact shape of every explanation she's ever given me when something didn't add up. She's never lying, according to her. She's always been generous on my behalf, in ways I apparently just never got to consent to. She pivots fast, the way she always does when a question gets too specific. The new venture, she says, is bigger than furniture. A subscription platform for interior designers, investors already circling, and she wants me as her first call. Not an employee this time, a true partner. Equity from day one. She says equity from day one like it's supposed to erase the 4 years I spent as an unequal one. I ask her what happened to my stake in Willow and Frame. She tells me she'll get me the paperwork, which is a sentence I will hear 4 more times over the following 2 months and never once see followed by an actual document. I don't say yes that day. I also, and this is the part I'm not proud of, don't say no. I say I need to think about it. She smiles like thinking about it is a formality, like she already knows how this ends, because it's ended the exact same way every other time. I go home that night and do something I've never done before in 5 years of trusting her completely. I open an old shared drive. I start reading contracts I signed without reading closely the first time. And somewhere around midnight, I find the first line that doesn't match the story she told me at that coffee shop. It's small. A single date, changed by 9 months. Small enough to be nothing. I would learn very soon that nothing was never really nothing with Nadia. The date that doesn't match is on the original operating agreement, the one we both signed the week we filed for the LLC. My copy says March. The version in Nadia's shared drive, the one she must have re-uploaded at some point, says December. 9 months earlier. I sit with my laptop open until almost 2 in the morning, cross-referencing bank statements against that date. Because if the agreement was really signed in December, then my initial investment would have happened before the company legally existed, which would mean, on paper, that I put money into nothing, into a shell, into a favor to a friend, not a stake in a business. I find the wire transfer. December 4th, $11,000, my name on the sender line. The agreement Nadia's drive shows me is dated December 2nd, 2 days before my own money moved. I want you to notice how quiet that discovery is. No dramatic confrontation, no slammed laptop. Just a woman at her kitchen table at 2 in the morning, doing math on a document that was rewritten to make her look like a favor instead of a founder. If you've ever found one small inconsistency and felt an entire relationship reorganize itself in your chest, tell me in the comments, because I think more of us have lived this than we admit out loud. I don't confront her right away. I do something smarter, something I learned from 5 years of watching her manage every difficult conversation before it happened. I get organized first. I pull every email between us going back to year 1. I screenshot every text where she calls me her partner, her co-founder, the person who built this with her. I find a podcast interview from 18 months ago where she says, on record, "Priya and I are 50-50 on everything, always have been." 50-50, on tape, dated well after the December agreement that supposedly cut my stake down to a technicality. Here's where the pattern starts to widen, because once you start pulling one thread, you find out how much of the sweater was already unraveling. I call Danny, our old accountant, the one Nadia let go 2 years ago and replaced with her cousin's firm. I ask him, carefully, if anything about the transition ever struck him as strange. There's a long pause on the line before he tells me something I wasn't ready for. He says Nadia asked him, months before he was let go, to help her simplify the cap table. He says he refused because simplifying, in this case, meant quietly reducing my documented percentage to match whatever she needed it to be for a future sale. He says that's the real reason he was let go, not budget cuts like she told me. He pushed back on the paperwork, and 3 weeks later, he was gone. I hang up the phone and sit in my car for a long time. Not the grocery store parking lot this time, my own driveway. Same silence, different location, same feeling of the ground rearranging itself under a life I thought I understood. Here is the moment I want you to remember, because it's the moment I stop being someone this happens to and start being someone paying close attention. I text Nadia. I keep it simple, almost friendly. I ask her to send over the full historical cap table, just for my records, before I decide on the new venture. She responds within the hour. "Of course," she says, "just gathering it now. So happy you're leaning toward yes." Leaning toward yes. I never said yes. I never even said maybe out loud to her. She's already narrating the ending she wants, the same way she narrated the sale before I knew it happened, the same way she narrated Danny's exit as a budget decision instead of a warning he tried to give her. 3 days pass. No cap table arrives. I ask again, lighter this time, almost joking, "So, are you turning into an ex I have to chase for documents now?" She sends back a laughing emoji and a promise. "Monday," she says. "I'll have it to you Monday." Monday comes, Monday goes. I already know, by the way she goes quiet exactly when a paper trail is required, that I'm no longer trying to understand a misunderstanding. I'm documenting a pattern. And once you can see a pattern clearly enough to name it, you cannot unsee it, no matter how many years of hugs and heart emojis are sitting on top of it. Here is what reckless looks like when it finally shows itself. Nadia posts about the new venture before she's finished pretending to gather my paperwork. A carousel, polished, professional, captioned, "Building something new with people who've been with me since the beginning." My name is nowhere in it. Neither is Willow and Frame. It's like the last 5 years got quietly filed under before, a chapter she's decided doesn't need crediting. I don't comment. I don't like it. I screenshot it and add it to the folder that's growing heavier by the day. 2 investors reach out to me directly that same week, which I did not expect and Nadia almost certainly did not plan for. One of them, a woman named Odalis, who used to be a client of ours, says she saw my name on old marketing material and wanted to check that I was actually part of this new thing before she wired anything. I tell her the truth. Carefully, without accusation, just facts laid end to end. I tell her about the December agreement dated 2 days before my investment cleared. I tell her about Danny and the cap table he refused to simplify. I tell her I have not agreed to anything, and I have been asking for basic financial documents for almost 3 weeks with no answer. If you're watching this and you've ever had to decide how much truth to hand a stranger who could either save you or make everything worse, I want you to sit in that decision with me for a second, because I did not make it lightly. Odalis goes quiet on the call for a moment. Then she says something I won't forget. She says, "This isn't the first time I've heard something like this about her." Not the first time. She won't give me names. Not yet. She says it isn't her story to tell. But she confirms there was a prior partnership, before Willow and Frame even existed, that ended in a similar way. A quiet buyout. A friend written out of the paperwork after stepping back for a family emergency. She says the woman never went public. Too tired, too embarrassed, too unsure whether she'd actually be believed. This is the moment the pattern stops being about me. I always assumed, somewhere underneath the hurt, that I was a special case. That something about my situation, my timing, my trust, made me uniquely easy to take advantage of. Hearing that there was someone before me, doing the exact same math at some other kitchen table, some other year, changes the shape of the whole story in my chest. It's not that I was careless. It's that I was chosen. Deliberately, by someone who has apparently done this math before and knows exactly which piece of a person's life makes them too distracted, too grateful, or too tired to check the paperwork closely. I stop being gentle after that call. I send Nadia one more message, and this time I don't dress it up as a friendly nudge. I tell her I've spoken to Danny. I tell her I've spoken to an investor who mentioned a prior partner with a strikingly similar story. I ask her directly to send the cap table by end of day, or I'm retaining a lawyer to request it formally. The read receipt shows immediately. No typing bubble. No response for 6 hours. When she finally writes back, the warmth is gone completely, and for the first time since that email arrived on a Tuesday, I hear something that sounds almost like the truth. She says, "You're really going to blow up something good over paperwork?" Not "I'm sorry." Not "let me explain." Just an accusation dressed up as concern. The same move she's made a dozen times. Except this time, I'm not confused by it anymore. I write back 4 words. "Send the documents, Nadia." I don't hear from her again for 5 days. When I finally do, it isn't a message. It's a letter from her lawyer. The letter is 2 pages, from a firm I've never heard of, and it accuses me of attempting to interfere with active investor relationships and disseminating unverified claims about Nadia's business practices. Unverified. As if a wire transfer with my name on it is a rumor. As if a recorded podcast interview where she calls us 50-50 is a claim instead of her own voice. I read it standing in my kitchen, my daughter napping upstairs, and I feel something shift in me that isn't panic. I expected panic. What actually arrives is closer to clarity, cold and steady, the kind that shows up once you're finally done being surprised by someone. I want you to notice the timing here, because timing is where a pattern finally becomes undeniable. She didn't send a lawyer's letter when I first asked, gently, for paperwork. She didn't send one when I asked a second time, a little sharper. She sent it only after I mentioned Danny by name, and only after I mentioned an investor who'd heard about someone before me. A person protecting a misunderstanding sends an explanation. A person protecting a pattern sends a lawyer. I call an attorney of my own that same afternoon, a woman named Farida who specializes in small business disputes, and I lay out everything. The December date, the wire transfer, Danny's account of the cap table request, the podcast clip, Odalis's warning about a prior partner. She listens without interrupting, and when I'm done, she says something I needed to hear from someone who wasn't inside my own exhausted head. She says, "This isn't ambiguous. This is a paper trail." Farida sends a formal request for the full financial and ownership history of Willow and Frame, citing my documented initial investment and the discrepancy in the operating agreement's date. She copies Nadia's lawyer. She copies me. For 4 days, nothing. On the 5th day, something happens that I did not predict, and it's the part of this story that still surprises me every time I tell it. Odalis calls me back. She tells me the other woman, the prior partner from before Willow and Frame even existed, has agreed to talk. Her name is Serena. She ran a small event planning business with Nadia almost a decade ago, before any of us knew each other. And she describes, almost word for word, the same sequence I just lived through. A quiet restructuring during a family emergency, a sale she found out about after the fact, a generous offer to come in on the next thing that conveniently never included repayment for what she'd already put in. Serena tells me one detail I will never forget. She says Nadia used the exact phrase, "I was protecting you," in the conversation where she explained why Serena hadn't been told about the sale in advance. The exact phrase. Word for word, 9 years apart, on 2 different women who never met each other until a stranger connected the dots. This is the moment the story stops being about a disagreement between 2 old friends over money. This is a pattern with a decade-long track record, refined enough that the same sentence works twice because it worked the first time and nobody ever said it back to her in public. Serena agrees to give a statement to Farida. Combined with Danny's account, the podcast clip, and my own paper trail, we now have something that isn't a grudge or a misunderstanding. It's a documented history. Nadia's lawyer calls Farida 2 days later, and the tone of the entire situation changes overnight. No more talk of interference, no more accusations, just a request to resolve this quietly, without further escalation. Quietly. That word again. Doing the same work it's always done in Nadia's mouth. Trying to keep something small enough that no one outside the room ever has to know what it cost the people inside it. This time, I'm the one who gets to decide whether quiet is good enough. Here's how it actually ends. Not the version Nadia would tell if she still got to narrate it. Farida and I decide quiet isn't good enough, but public isn't the goal either. The goal was always accuracy. So we draft a settlement that does 3 things Nadia's lawyer clearly wasn't expecting. It restores my documented percentage in Willow and Frame retroactively, which means a real, verified share of that $400,000 sale comes to me. It requires a written correction acknowledging the December agreement date was altered without my knowledge. And it removes any confidentiality clause that would have kept me from ever telling this story, or telling Serena's, or telling whoever comes after us. Nadia signs it in 11 days. 11 days after 2.5 months of silence, calendar invites, and lawyer letters. It's strange how fast people move once the paper trail stops being deniable. I don't hear an apology. I want to tell you I got one, the kind you see in movies, but that's not how patterns usually end. What I got instead was something more useful. I got the truth, documented, on paper, in a form that can't be talked back into a technicality at 2 in the morning. Serena and I talk on the phone sometimes now. Not about Nadia, not really. About the strange relief of being believed by someone who never even knew you, just because your story happened to match theirs down to the exact sentence. I think about the version of me sitting in that grocery store parking lot, rereading an email, trying to figure out if technically was a fair word to use about 5 years of my own hands and my own money. I wish I could tell her it gets clearer. I wish I could tell her the fog she's standing in has a shape, and the shape has a name. And once she sees it, she'll never mistake it for confusion again. If there's one thing I want you to take from this, it's this. A person who explains away one missing conversation might just be careless. A person who has the exact same explanation ready for two different women a decade apart isn't careless. They're practiced. You don't have to catch it the first time. Almost nobody does. But you're allowed to trust the second time you notice the same sentence coming out of the same mouth for the same reason. I started a new business this year. Smaller, slower, entirely mine, no takeout menu business plans, no 50-50 promises made in interviews and quietly revised in December. Just my name on every document, matching every number every single time. And if you've ever wondered whether the story you're telling yourself about someone is finally the true one, stick around for the next one, because the woman in that story thought she was the only one too, right up until she wasn't. I'm Hani. People always show you who they are. We just slow it down. I'll see you in the next one.